A senior United States military commander recently warned of what he termed as wildfire of terrorism sweeping across Africa at the conclusion of massive US-led war games in the continent. In trying to justify Washington's meddling in Africa, he further claimed that insecurity in the continent threatens the United States.
Once they take root in Africa, they'll spread to Europe and eventually to the United States. It's a threat to the United States. It may not be a threat to the U.S. homeland right now. It is definitely a threat to America's interest in the world.
Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of Africa Today, a program which gives you an incisive analysis on events taking place in Africa. This week's edition is focusing on how the United States is using the pretext of combating terrorism to destabilize African countries while pursuing its hegemonic interests. In the second segment of our program, we shall discuss the situation in the strategic Horn of Africa region, where major global powers are rushing to establish their military presence. Join us as our experts examine these two subjects and send us your views as you watch.
U.S. military destabilizing Africa. General Stephen Townsend, head of the United States Africa Command, commonly known as AFRICOM, has painted a dark picture of threats throughout Africa. Speaking in mid-June after war games dubbed African Lion, held mostly in Morocco, Townsend claimed that Africa will experience a new wave of terrorism. Townsend warned of terrorism in Africa, yet the terror groups spreading mayhem in Africa are the products of the extremist ideology spread by Saudi Arabia, a key US ally in the region. All major terrorist groups operating in Africa, such as Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab and several other groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda and Daesh terror groups, all strictly adhere to the Saudi Wahhabi ideology.
The creation of the United States Africa Command is part of a familiar pattern used by the U.S. to spread its hegemonic tentacles across the world. An African-American activist expounds here. Let's take a listen.
You know, just like Afghanistan, going after the Taliban was the broader excuse for going into a geostrategically important region. Just like, the United States allying with any particular country is allegedly for something, protecting democracy and freedom versus something else. It's the same thing that we have. We have the same situation here in Africa post 9/11, which is that it's used as a pretext. Terrorism, quote unquote, is used as a pretext, a twofold pretext.
For more on U.S. military adventurism in Africa, we have contacted Tiseto Magama. He's a political activist and a former member of South African Parliament. Welcome to our show.
No, thank you for having me.
Now, the U.S. claims its troops are in Africa to combat terrorism. Yet, despite decades-long U.S. presence in the continent, terrorism has continued to increase. Now, what's your take on this?
The U.S. has been less interested in issues of terrorism or generally, security and safety for the African continent. I mean, for the U.S., it has always been, advancement of their geopolitical and strategic interests across the world. Their real engagement on the African continent, was really during the post-Second World War, but during the Cold War period, when the U.S. was indeed trying to extend its dominance across, especially countries that were fighting for their independence, from the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. And so the U.S.'s role on the African continent has really been characterized by, an entire geopolitical and strategic outlook that sought to entrench the U.S. hegemony across the globe, and of course, fighting the Soviet Union. And so what we see with the U.S. role in countries like Niger, in Somalia, and elsewhere, is really a continuation of that kind of thinking in the United States of America.
Tiseto Magama, thank you for that.
The US is the foreign power with the highest military presence in Africa. According to reports, the US has at least 29 known outposts across the northern, western, eastern, and Horn regions of Africa. Although AFRICOM is spreading its tentacles throughout Africa under the guise of combating terrorism, most Africans are now increasingly becoming aware of the long-term dangers posed by the imperialist military forces, as this expert here explains.
If you ask local communities, locals see it again as sort of a new form of neocolonialism. a new form of sort of an extra sort of security blanket.
Mr. Magama, what do you think are the hidden objectives of regular U.S. military drills in Africa?
Well, the United States really is its primary objective at the moment is to extend and deepen, U.S. hegemony. I think that's the first thing. But the second track really is the U.S. wants to hold on as long as possible, to its preeminent, so-called preeminent position as the superpower of the globe. And so what you see in terms of U.S. strategy on the African continent is really around, issues of so-called terrorism diplomacy, issues of so-called security, which they do not bring to any of the African countries in particular, but also in countries in Asia and in Latin America and elsewhere. And so this is part of that broader game that the U.S. is playing, with no real input, on improving the conditions of the people of the global South in general, but of Africa in particular.
Well, the commander of the U.S. Africa Command recently alleged that China has been in contact with countries as far north as Mauritania and as far south as Namibia on establishing a naval facility with the capability to host submarines or aircraft carriers. Now, Mr. Magama, AFRICOM commander has expressed concern over China's growing military influence in Africa. Do we expect to see confrontation between these two powers in Africa?
What we see really is a broader strategy of the United States using, all their instruments of foreign policy, chief of which, of course, has always been the military, to try to counter China and what they refer to as Chinese influence on the African continent, as if Africans don't have agency.
The 2021 edition of the African Lion military drill took place near the disputed region of Western Sahara. In the December of last year, former United States President Donald Trump broke with years of international consensus to recognize Morocco's claim to the disputed territory of Western Sahara. The recognition was part of a deal in which Morocco agreed to normalize ties with the Israeli regime. The African Union and dozens of countries recognize Western Sahara as an independent state.
Speaking when he hosted President Brahim Ghali of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the liberation of Africa is incomplete without the liberation of Western Sahara.
We are certain that the people of Western Sahara will be free one day. Our liberation and the liberation of our continent will not be complete without the liberation of Western Sahara.
Now, is the U.S. recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara, followed by military drills near this region, an affront to the African Union?
The African Union is the premier institution of Africans, of the African peoples and African countries. And there is no way that the United States, acting as an imperial overlord, will dictate to the African people, what positions we should take. In fact, on 21 March of this year, the African Union again reconfirmed its position that, the question of Western Sahara must be dealt with in accordance with previous decisions of the United Nations Security Council and consistent, of course, with the African Union's own position. And so, the deal struck by the U.S. and the Moroccan government is a deal that is doomed to fail, because really what it was meant to do, similar to what Israel did with the other Arab states, was really clearly to try to vitiate, to try to liquidate the Palestinian question. In this case, to try to liquidate the question of Western Sahara.
Thank you for that, Mr. Magama.
The African Union is concerned about foreign military bases on the continent, as this goes against the concept of African solutions to African problems. In a bid to discourage foreign forces from setting base in the continent, the African Union is engaged in regional efforts to combat terrorism. Ambassador Fatima Mohammed, the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations, elaborates here on regional efforts to combat terrorism in Africa.
The African Union peace support operations and ad hoc security coalitions have also significantly degraded the capabilities of some of the terrorist groups in the different sub-regions. At the national level, the criminal justice response to terrorism have also been strengthened with the adoption of the anti-terrorism legislation and the enhanced capacities of law enforcement agencies. There are also growing efforts by our member states to better understand and address the political, social, and economic situation and conditions that make it conducive for the spread of violent ideologies.
Our last question to you, Mr. Magama, now. Can African countries defeat terrorism without interference by Western military powers, especially the U.S.?
We know that the terrorism that we face on the African continent was sponsored and in many instances still continues to be sponsored by very close allies of the United States in the Middle East. And so, there are attempts to, purely look at a military solution to what clearly is a situation that cannot be resolved merely by the military, is of course a manifestation or bears witness to the United States approach to issues of national security. I mean, look, if you are a hammer or all you have is a hammer, of course, everything looks like a nail. And so that has been the US's approach to issues of global insecurity without taking a comprehensive view of the root causes and other socio-economic issues that might be underlying the terrorism.
Well, you have it there. The military approach being imposed by the U.S. on African countries cannot eliminate terrorism in the continent. Thank you for that insight, Mr. Magama, a former member of the South African Parliament. Now, we shall take a short break, and when we come back, our guests will give an analysis on the scramble for the Horn of Africa. Don't go away.
Scramble for the Horn of Africa.
The Horn of Africa, a region that basically includes Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, and Ethiopia, is of great importance to regional and global powers due to its geopolitical and strategic considerations. Now, this region is now an epicenter of foreign military presence in Africa, with at least 13 foreign military bases.
Djibouti, a tiny Horn of Africa nation, plays host to naval bases of world and regional powers from the United States, Japan, France, Italy, Spain, and most recently China and Saudi Arabia. In 2017, China opened its first overseas military base in Djibouti. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson explains here on the importance of the base.
The base will help China to better fulfill its international obligation in Somali waters, such as carrying out escort missions and providing humanitarian aid. It will also benefit Djibouti in social and economic development and enable China to make further contribution in safeguarding peace and stability in Africa and the world.
The U.S. also recently appointed its first ever special envoy to the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman. Now, this led to fears that the region is set for more destabilizing moves by the U.S. and its allies. For more analysis on the apparent scramble for the Horn of Africa, we have contacted Lawrence Freeman, a political economic analyst for Africa. Thank you for your time, Mr. Freeman.
You're welcome.
Now, our first question to you. The United States has appointed a special envoy for the Horn of Africa. What's the real reason behind this appointment, and should we expect more meddling in the region by Washington?
But the situation in the Horn of Africa is very important strategically to the United States and to the West as a whole. Ethiopia has been a very strong ally of the United States for many decades, both on the Republican and Democratic presidential administrations. And the Special Envoy Feldman now has made a trip to the region, will be making another trip. And unfortunately, he's acting against the interest of the United States, which unfortunately is the policy of the United States. They have now turned against Ethiopia for the moment, a long-standing ally. And the Special Envoy, following the policy of the Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is not playing a helpful role in the region.
Now, early June, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister met Jeffrey Feltman in Riyadh. UAE's foreign minister also met Feltman to coordinate Horn of Africa strategies. Now, Mr. Freeman, as we have seen, Feltman recently visited some Persian Gulf monarchies. What roles are these countries playing in advancing Washington's interest in the Horn of Africa?
The Biden administration has adopted this view that the U.S. will impose a democracy dictatorship and human rights dictatorship on countries throughout the world, and is trying to force countries to behave in a way that they find acceptable to their view of liberal democracy. Unfortunately, this is having a very bad effect. The situation in Ethiopia is very difficult, and the U.S. is playing a very bad role at points by weakening the administration of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. They have a history of ethnic tensions where the government in Addis Ababa is struggling against various groups of ethno-nationalists to preserve the nation state. And some of the actions by the United States are actually weakening the government and weakening the nation.
The presence of rival foreign military bases in Djibouti has led to mutual accusation, especially between the US and China. For instance, in 2018, the Pentagon claimed Chinese nationals pointed lasers at US military aircraft in Djibouti. China's defense ministry said the US accusations were false.
This activity poses a true threat to our airmen. We have formally demarched the Chinese government, and we've requested that the Chinese investigate these incidents.
After strict verification, we have told the U.S. side that what they alleged is absolutely untrue.
Djibouti is the only nation hosting both US and Chinese military bases. So, is there any danger that these two superpowers will face off in this strategic Horn of Africa state?
Trump used Africa and made his foreign policy in Africa through John Bolton, his national security advisor, to stop China, counter China in Africa. The Biden administration is also out to stop China and counter China's efforts, and is taking a slightly different approach, but the intent is the same. That both the Trump and the Biden administrations suffer from the disease of geopolitics. They cannot conceive, they don't want to conceive of a world where countries are working together for the development of all people and all nations. They view the world as a zero-sum game. So if China is making progress in developing its economy and helping other economies, that is seen as a danger to those who follow the idiocy of geopolitics. And therefore, the Chinese must be kept down according to geopolitical doctrine. This is the same view the Trump administration has. It's the same view the Biden administration has. So yes, Africa can become a chessboard for warfare by the United States against China.
Ethiopia, the largest Horn of Africa country, has been experiencing internal instability and is also involved in a dispute with neighboring Sudan and Egypt over its construction of a giant dam on the Nile. Now, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says his country's share of the Nile's river waters are untouchable, in a stark warning apparently to Ethiopia, which is filling a giant new dam on the Nile's main tributary.
No one can take a single drop of water from Egypt and whoever wants to try it, let them try. I'm not threatening anyone here. Our dialogue is always reasonable and rational. No one can take a drop from Egypt's water, and if it happens, there will be inconceivable instability in the region.
Now, the Ethiopia dam dispute is threatening to ignite more instability in the Horn of Africa region. How are foreign powers fueling this dispute?
The Gerd Dam, which is in the process of a second filling, is not a danger to any country. The water will pass through the turbines and return to the Nile. None of the water is being taken for agriculture or any other development, unlike the Nile water in Egypt, which is. There is no danger. This is an effort which we saw in the Trump administration, and the Biden administration, even though they say they disagree with Trump on everything, are doing the same stupid thing that Trump did, which is they're trying to intervene to pressure Ethiopia to give in to Egypt, because they want Egypt as a political player to use in their brinkmanship with Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, which Egypt has a way of conducting dialogue with them, and Israel. Sudan has no reason to object to the dam, except it's being blackmailed to do so.
Somalia has one of the most protracted conflicts in Africa. This Horn of Africa nation has been torn apart by civil war since 1992, when clan-based warlords overthrew a dictator. The country is now crippled by deadly attacks perpetrated by Al-Shabaab Takfiri terrorists. Somalia has accused foreign countries, including US allies such as the United Arab Emirates, of destabilizing the country.
The monitoring group further stated that the establishment of foreign military base in Berbera involving the transfer of military material to the territory will constitute a violation of arms embargo on Somalia.
Now, Mr. Freeman, my last question to you. What are the reasons for the continued destabilization of Somalia, a major Horn of Africa state?
The overall policy that the U.S. has for the Horn of Africa is absent of any concept of economic growth. The situation in Somalia is one of the poorest, undeveloped countries in Africa. There are other countries like that. And what they have needed, the overall situation of the Horn of Africa, because of its strategic location in the Gulf of Eden along the Indian Ocean, because of the growth of Al-Shabaab and other extremist violent groups, that should be one of development. Ethiopia has 110 million people. Most of these people are poor. The majority of these people have no electricity. That's the same situation in Somalia. We should treat the region as a regional concern and promote a policy where we actually bring the people in Ethiopia and Somalia out of poverty. If you eliminate poverty and you eliminate hunger, you can bring stability to the region. And that's what our policy should be.
Mr. Freeman there says elimination of poverty will restore stability in the Horn of Africa region. Thanks a lot, Mr. Freeman, and unfortunately our time is up for today. It's been great having you all watch our show. Let us know what you think about our discussion today by dropping us a line through our social media handle that appears on the screen. You can also watch the show anytime by visiting our website, presstv.ir. On behalf of my colleagues here, I would like to thank you all for watching. Have a great time and goodbye for now.